Hello and welcome to The View. In the last two episodes on Michael Jackson's legal troubles, we spoke to a couple of guests who believed that the verdict the jury reached in the 2005 case was the correct one. Today, in the spirit of even-handedness, I've invited a guest who believes that Michael Jackson was in fact guilty. And it's not just any guest. Former Senior Deputy District Attorney Ron Zonen was described by Michael Jackson's defense lawyer, Thomas Mesereau, as among the finest prosecutors he's ever faced in a courtroom. He tried the 2005 case on behalf of the state of California and has been kind enough to make time to speak to us today. Hello, Ron, how are you?
Good morning, or more accurately, good evening for you.
Good evening for me. It's very early for you. It's probably the only hour in which we could have done this program. So, Ron, let me. Well, we're in an interesting position because obviously you tried a case in which I would have acquitted if I had been a member of the jury. But I do think that one is able to have civilized conversations about these things regardless. I want to begin by asking you how the last 21 years have been. Ever since that case wrapped up. Can you just give me a potted history of?
First of all, let me correct one thing that you said in the introduction,
Sure.
although I appreciate your introduction. I don't disagree with the verdict. It was the verdict. The jury spoke. That was their verdict. It was appropriate. It
Okay.
was, and that has been my career. I have won many cases as a prosecutor. I was a prosecutor close to 40 years. And I lost my share of cases as well. And I never begrudged it. If the jury felt that there wasn't sufficient evidence to convict, so be it. That's their statement. That's their job. I don't take issue with it. So I've never felt that the jury verdict was necessarily inappropriate. I felt that there were things that had happened in the trial that could have been different, either in terms of rulings from the court or in terms of cooperation of witnesses who could have made a difference in the presentation of evidence. But I don't take issue with the jury's verdict. That was their verdict.
Okay, understood. So to return to my question, I mean,
over the last 21 years, there were no
what have you been up to?
There were no cameras in the courtroom, which meant as soon as the trial was over, I was able to resume my life very normally, reasonably normally. There were the requests for interviews that go on to this day, 21 years later, as is evidenced by the fact that I'm sitting and looking at a camera. But other than that, life was fairly normal. I went back to being a prosecutor for a number of more years. I finally retired about 10 years later, a little less than that, and went to work in private practice. And I've been doing that since. And life is reasonably normal. I get the occasional call to come and interview and add some commentary on what had happened. And a rather momentous trial. It was a trial that attracted a considerable amount of attention around the world. So I knew that there would be a consequence to that. I mean, I knew that I would be called upon to give interviews now and then. But I can walk down the street with impunity. I can get on an airplane and travel with impunity. Nobody looks at me and recognizes me. That doesn't happen. So life, for the most part, for me, was pretty normal after that. It was ultimately just another trial.
Yes, I'd wondered if the beard was a disguise. Ron, how many sex abuse cases did you try?
The beard was COVID.
The beard was COVID. Okay.
COVID.
The hair was COVID. No, I'm joking. I've always had long. So, Ron, in your career as a prosecutor, how many sexual? Let me start again. So, Ron, in your career as a prosecutor, how many sex abuse cases have you tried?
Oh, probably the order of about 30, maybe more than that.
So this is something that you were obviously an expert in. When you receive an allegation of sex abuse, how do you determine if the child is credible?
Well, there are a few things that we usually do. I mean, obviously, we interview the child, and interviewing the child would give us a sense of what's going on in the household, what's going on with the child, what's going on with the family. What is the relationship with the person who's allegedly the offender in this particular case? But it gives us a sense of not just whether or not the child is credible. I have found very few cases where I thought that the child was fabricating an allegation. That will sometimes happen with older teenagers. Rarely happens with a young child, a prepubescent child. But we tend to look at the interview with the child as a way of being able to decide whether the child has the capacity to be able to testify in a courtroom, to be able to go through cross-examination, to be able to give a compelling accounting of what had happened, to be able to accurately repeat what had happened factually. That's kind of what we're looking forward on that. And then we look to see if there's adequate corroboration, if we can find any kind of evidence that corroborates the child, or is it simply the child's statement and that's the full extent of the evidence? Those are very difficult cases. Juries tend to be concerned about, they tend to find that as insufficient evidence to be able to convict, unless it's a uniquely talented child who has a remarkable ability to convey what had happened and do so credibly.
So what corroborating evidence did you find?
You mean in the Jackson case?
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, we actually did. I mean, a lot of the information that was given to us by the victim and by his brother, we were able to corroborate. They had talked to us about a large collection of adult material, adult magazines that were found, and where it was found, and where it was kept, and the type of magazines that they have. And we were able to find those, and we were able to find the kids' fingerprints on those magazines as well. So they were where they said they would be found, and in fact, they were the same types of magazines that they said that they would be found. I thought that was uniquely corroborative. But we also had other circumstances. We certainly had his history of taking one child after another into his bedroom for extended period of times. It may be a weekend or a week, or it may be, as in some of those kids, for up to a year. But there was always a child that was sharing his bed for that time. I considered that to be corroborative evidence as well. They talked about the alcohol that was in his room and his constant drinking and giving alcohol to the kids. We were able to find that as well, the evidence of alcohol in his room. We found an empty vial of Versed, which is a drug. He, of course, overdosed eventually and died from a drug overdose, but he was addicted to those kinds of medications, and we were able to find that too. I thought that at one point he may have spiked one of the drinks because of the child's description of being very, very out of it, much more than you would have expected just from a glass of wine. So we were able to find that too. So I felt that there was corroboration in the case. The significant corroboration would have been other victims coming forward. And they have since come forward since the trial has happened, but they were not willing to cooperate with us during the course of the trial. That was the biggest challenge that we faced.
Well, yes, we'll talk about those in a second. My question to you, when you talk about corroborating evidence, is I think you spoke in the Netflix documentary, The Verdict, and you mentioned, I think, Ron, that the kids, that the Arvizo kids had access to Michael Jackson's room, and that they sort of knew the passcode of how to get entry. So, I guess I'm asking, what is the value of this corroborating evidence? You're saying, that they were able to identify where Michael Jackson kept his adult material. But all that really proves is that they'd been in his bedroom, no?
No, I don't think so. Look, the defense in the case was, this is a man who suffered from a horrible case of arrested development, that he was really just a 10-year-old. He was actually in his 40s, but he was really at heart a 10-year-old. He was at his most comfortable when he was associating with children. If that's true, why is there all that booze? Why is he taking drugs? And why is there an enormous collection of adult material in there? That's not what you would expect of a 10-year-old. So I felt
No. I understand that point. I'm just saying, the fact that they were able to locate, you made a point about this. You said, what we found corroborative was that they were able to say where all this adult material was. But all that really proves is that they were there, right? That they were in the room.
they were in the room, it proves that they knew where he kept his briefcase filled with material, and it proves that they knew where he had his greater stash of adult material in a different room. The question is, why would a child being brought into his room have access to that material? If he
But this is not. But this is
if,
not what you argued during the case, Ron. During the case, you argued something different. You argued that everyone knew where this stuff was. That's why I'm saying. That's why I'm asking the question.
I argued what? Say that again.
You argued during the actual case that everybody knew where this material was. So that's why I'm asking the question. It's not like, your argument during the case was that everyone on the ranch knew where this stuff was.
All right, I doubt that I said that. You would have to show me the transcript of that, because I don't know that everybody on the ranch did know that. The people who had access to his bedroom were his maids, Michael Jackson, and the boys that he invited in there. We weren't able to determine that anyone else ever had access to his bedroom. The maids who cleaned up, the boys who he entertained in his room, and that's pretty much it. We never had any indication that either of his two wives ever spent even an hour in his bedroom. We had no evidence that that was the case. So if you're saying that I said that everyone knew where the adult material was in the room, if everybody is him and the boys who were there, then that would be a correct statement, because I'm certain that all the boys who came into that room were entertained with that material. I doubt that the maids were. Now, they may have known about it, but we have no reason to believe that that's the case.
Just because I think it's very important when you say something to actually substantiate it. For me, as someone who's asking the questions, I shouldn't seem like I'm just inventing it. Here's what you said, right? You said, remember the open door policy that Mr. Culkins talked about. Anybody could walk in there. His children walk in there, the staff who walk in there and clean his room. It had to be the case that every single person who works at Neverland understands that he collects material like this. Next, you go on to say, again, his open door policy, anybody in that ranch walks in there and sees this stuff, including his own children. He is simply not inhibited about hiding what he finds to be interesting sexually. Everybody on the ranch knows what's in there. Now, I would not have asked you this question had I not seen that in the Netflix documentary, and had I not seen that in the transcript. So, it's something you were arguing something very different during the case.
If I was referring about everybody who came in there, then I'm referring to children. Would the maids have known about it? Well, quite possibly. The material kept in his room in a black briefcase, as I recall. Keep in mind, this is 21 years ago.
Yes.
It was in a black briefcase in his room, but that was a small collection of material. Our understanding is that he would collect material, he would put in the black briefcase, he would periodically funnel the stuff out of there and bring new material in. Magazines. Essentially, they were magazines with depicting women undressed or women engaging in sex acts. The rest of it was, I believe, if I recall correctly, in a different room. Certainly, everybody who walked in there in the context of being children were aware of that. That I believe completely. I don't remember at this point whether we had any definitive information about a staff member being a maid. Those were the only other people in there, of a maid knowing about that material. They may have, I just don't remember at this stage. But to the extent that everybody knew about it, to the extent that you're talking about children, and there were plenty of them over the years. It was a substantial number. They would.
But you also mentioned staff, and you mentioned everyone, right? So I'm just saying what you said. I obviously don't know. I wasn't around.
I'm sorry. I don't remember the context of that statement. It was 21 years ago. The best I can tell you at this point, to the extent of everyone, if it's children, and there were certainly an abundance of them, that I believe is a true statement. They would have known about it. Staff, to my recollection, was only maids, and a select number of them had access to his room. Now, there was a different room that had material in it as well, and it could have been more staff. I just don't remember at this stage.
Okay, and sort of the testimony of the actress Vernee Watson-Johnson, who said that these kids visited her house and were all up in her stuff, and the dentist they went to see, who said that they had sort of rummaged through her sterile material, the fact that Star Vizo knew about the drawer where Michael Jackson kept his razors, the cupboard where he kept his pajamas, that's not convincing to you as far as, these kids just sort of having access to the room and looking around looking into drawers.
No, the kids did have access to the room, and I'm sure the kids did rummage around. Let me explain something that I did argue to the jury, and that I believed at the time and believe today. There was a level of delinquency that was encouraged by Michael Jackson of these kids. They behaved recklessly while they were there, and it was encouraged by him. He wanted their inhibitions reduced. He wanted them to be able to behave as if there were no rules and no responsibility. That was consistent with him sexualizing them. So they were up all night. They were out and about. They were drinking. They were doing whatever they wanted. They ate whatever they wanted. They drank whatever they wanted. They were encouraged to do that. And kids are kids. If they're encouraged to misbehave, they'll misbehave. And it could be probably anybody's kid. At the time they're ensconced in Michael Jackson's home, they're now separated from parents. And in most instances, it's parent. It's just a mother. There's usually no father in the picture for most of these kids. And that's pretty typical of pedophilia situations. They're looking for dysfunctional homes to be able to develop a relationship with the mom and no father in the picture. And they're encouraged to behave in a way like that because that's part of the sexualization process. So he now gets to the magazines. He now encourages to look at the nudity in the magazines. He encourages them to engage in sex acts. It's part of the whole process. So yes, the kids were rummaging around in the room, rummaging around in the house, and to a certain extent misbehaving, as were all of the kids who are on that ranch at any given time, because that's what they were encouraged to do. And nobody should think that that speaks to the character of these children. It doesn't.
No, and I don't say that it speaks to the character of the children. I never made that point. This is a 13-year-old and a 10-year-old, or maybe even younger. So I'm not saying anything about their characters, and nor would I do that about a kid that age. I think that's worth saying right now. It's my understanding that of the magazines that were recovered, there were 3 magazines on which both Gavin and Michael Jackson had prints, but that the prints were on separate pages, as in there was no page on which they both had fingerprints. I guess you still stand by the assertion that he was showing them pornography through these magazines?
Sure.
Okay.
Sure. He was encouraging them to look at this material. They didn't rummage around and find it and then look at it, then quickly conceal it when he came into the room. That's not what happened. And I think you have to be uniquely naive to believe that that's what happened. All of the kids talked about this, and they do now. I mean, I suspect if you go talk to, what's his name, Casio, who has now come forward with his own lawsuit against the Michael Jackson administration, you probably would get the same answers about it. I don't think that there was ever a situation where the kids were just rummaging around and looking at stuff without Michael Jackson there doing it with them. I also take issue with the question of whether there were fingerprints of both of them on the same page. Because we didn't find necessarily doesn't mean there weren't. I mean, fingerprint art is not an exact science. You sometimes find things and then you look a little more and you find more. But they found a huge number of fingerprints from the 2 boys, and they found fingerprints from Michael Jackson. And I think that what they said was, yeah, we looked at this material with him. I have no reason to disbelieve that. And I don't think anybody's under an obligation to automatically disbelieve anything these 2 boys said. I think that is an injustice.
You think that's an injustice? Okay. Well, I'm just putting myself in the position of a prospective juror, I wasn't there at the time, but I feel like, this is something that, I would have found it significant, but we'll agree to disagree.
You would not You would not have found significant the fact that this man who brings children into his bedroom for extended periods of time, and not just into his bedroom, but into his bed for long periods of time, is also a man intrigued by having this adult erotica surrounding him in enormous amounts, enormous amounts. Somehow or other, that's not intriguing to you as well?
No, it is. No, it is intriguing, and it's highly inappropriate. And it's highly inappropriate, no doubt about it.
Does it
But
suggest perhaps a sexual interest in these children as well, that he's using this material for purposes of sexualizing them?
how can you make that argument without any more proof than the fact that they were just there, and that that the pages had fingerprints on, that separate pages had fingerprints of both? I don't see how you can make that argument conclusively. It seems like a leap.
I can make any argument I think is appropriate, and the question is, will the jury believe it? Will the jury accept compelling evidence?
Right, exactly.
Compelling evidence because I believe the testimony of the children was compelling. Now, there are people who will tell you you can't ever believe a victim of a sex crime. I have had that come across to juries all the time when I try those cases, particularly involving adult women, where you listen to the argument of the defense attorney in the closing argument, and you realize that the defense attorney has not conceded one single word that has come out of the victim's mouth, essentially telling them you can't believe a woman who says she was raped. And we're seeing that
but
now.
no one is saying that. But no one is saying that, Ron. No one is saying that. No, I'm not. No one is saying that. But let's move on, because there are lots of other things to talk about. But no one is saying that, just for the record. During the trial, you'll remember there was this rebuttal video that was filmed in which the Arvizo family is essentially gushing about Michael Jackson, what a great guy he is.
I remember it.
Now, when prosecutor Tom Sneddon interviewed Gavin about the allegations, he said, the acts of molestation, had they already begun by the time you did this video? And Gavin says, I think so. And the prosecutor then says, so in your mind, one of the things that you're thinking is they're doing this video that they want you guys to do so that if you ever told them the truth about being molested, no one would believe you. And Gavin says, yeah. In the court case, the timeline changes, and the boy alleges that the molestation happened after the rebuttal video. I've never understood the reason for that discrepancy. Can you tell us why the timeline changed?
I can. The timeline really didn't change. He believes that he was molested before and after. He remembers with more vivid detail the events that took place after. He said in the early stages, that was usually accompanied by the alcohol that he was drinking. And he felt that he wasn't reliable in terms of his ability to be able to state what exactly happened. Everything was quite fuzzy for him. And it was his preference to be able to talk about the events that occurred after the video was made. He had a better recollection of it and a better understanding of it. But he believed that there were acts of molestation that took place before as well. That was an issue that we dealt with in the trial. And we were very aware of the fact that Mesereau was going to make a big deal about the timeline. And people afterward, I thought it was rather honorable of Gavin, even as a child, to be able to say, I'm pretty sure the molestations took place before that trip. I really can't describe them in any specificity. He was giving us a lot of alcohol at the time, and it really is kind of blurry. So he elected to be able to talk specifically about the events that took place afterward. We had every expectation that that would be something that Mesereau would be pounding on. And of course he did. But I didn't feel that I felt it was honorable on his part to be able to say, look, I just don't have an adequate memory of those specific events.
So the reason I ask is we were told on this program by another guest that law enforcement had raided the offices of Michael Jackson's attorney's private investigator and also the offices of his personal assistant. And they'd found evidence that Michael Jackson had an alibi for when the original molestation was supposed to have taken place. And that's why you changed it. But I would like you to just respond to that, because you deserve a right to reply.
I don't remember that ever being a subject of conversation. We had to be able to say had an alibi on a specific day would presuppose that Gavin actually knew of a specific day. Children rarely do. Children will say it happened over a period of time. So to be able to say he had an alibi on a specific day simply isn't consistent with my understanding of the evidence at the time.
An
Because
alibi over a specific period, I said, period. If I said day, then I misspoke.
I'm not certain what day or period we're necessarily talking about. Children are rarely specific, even in terms of time frames. If it went on over a period of time, it was during a time that he was at Neverland with Michael Jackson. I don't know that he would have been in a position to be able to say it would be these days or this group of days or that group of days. I just don't think that that would ever happen.
Okay. So on the timeline of the actual case you tried, right? So let me tell you anecdotally that whenever I've spoken to anyone about this, the moment they learn that the supposed molestation happened a couple of weeks after the release of the Bashir documentary, that's the moment when people tend to shake their heads, right? So, I mean, we're talking about a period when the media scrutiny on Michael Jackson is dialed up to 11. The Department of Children and Family Services has been investigating him. He knows about it. Everyone with a television or an internet connection in the English-speaking world, all they can talk about is his inappropriate relationships with children, right? And it is then that he decides to molest a child. I mean, does that not seem implausible?
Not if you know Michael Jackson. Look, Neverland is a different situation than any place you've ever been. It's some 2,600 acres of isolation, protected by a wall, by a gate, by guards. And he has this large house with these two kids, and he's barricaded inside, and they're locked in. And even in his bedroom, there's a separate alarm system for anybody coming down the hallway, coming into the bedroom. I think that, and we've wrestled with that question. We had talked about that, and we knew that that was going to be an issue that would be brought up. And I think the answer to it is you just have to understand Michael Jackson. For him, having a child in his bed is irresistible, or was at the time. He's gone now, of course. And I think that opportunity and that child in his bed and the security of Neverland, the security of knowing you've got this group, this child in your room, in your bedroom, in a secured fortress-like environment with 2,800 or 2,600 acres environment where nobody can get to. I think he just didn't care. I think he didn't care. He was somebody who found it irresistible. He had a child. Child was in his bed. Look, we know the child was in his bed. We know the child was in his room, and he's still subject to the same scrutiny. And you have to concede that that is a true fact. So the only question that concerns you is, would he then touch the child who's already lying in bed next to him all night, every night? So
would he be impulsive and stupid enough to do that at that moment?
Yes. But can't you say that of any child molester, impulsive and stupid? Any child molester knows that there's a risk of a child telling somebody what had happened, and they do it anyway. And they know that if the child does tell somebody and the police are brought into it, their life will change dramatically. All of a sudden, they're going to be dealing with a whole different world. We had a judge who used to tell defendants, your life has just gotten a lot more interesting. And he didn't mean that in a positive way. So, but every child molester deals with that. I've got a child. I have to convince this child to stay quiet about it. I want to molest this child. I want to touch the child. I want to have sex with the child. But I have to do something to make sure that this child never tells anybody. That's a risky proposition in general. And I would suggest that it's no less risky than what Michael Jackson did on those days that he had a child already in his bed. And you have to concede, he was already in his bed. That they never quarreled with. That there was ample evidence of proof, and no one ever said otherwise. Their defense to that was
did they
children.
Did they ever?
I think to accept that.
Did they ever admit? Did they ever admit? I'm asking you because I don't remember myself. Did they ever admit that Michael Jackson and Gavin were in the bed together I mean, because I don't know this. I know only about the Bashir documentary in which Michael Jackson states that he slept on the floor somewhere. I think something that Gavin corroborates. But has this been accepted?
I I don't believe that they ever argued in the trial that Gavin was not in his bed. Just like they didn't
Okay.
argue
Okay.
that Wade Robson was not in his bed or Brett Barnes was not in his bed. Brett Barnes testified that he was for a year. They never said anything otherwise. So the answer to your
Okay.
question is I don't remember if Tom Mesereau got up in closing argument and said, I concede that these children were in his bed, or just left it alone and did an argument. But he never said
Okay.
otherwise. He never said they were never
Okay.
in his bed with them. That was never a point
Okay.
of contention in the trial.
Okay. Okay. So like I mean, so I guess part of the problem that someone like me has with this is, you know, you've said that he's so impulsive and stupid that he would molest a child right at the moment when scrutiny on him is at its highest point. It's dialed up to 11. But simultaneously, you also argue that this is some kind of criminal mastermind who hatches an elaborate conspiracy to abduct a family and hold them hostage. And it's just kind of like, it just sort of seems like, is this guy like a criminal genius, or is he a fool? Like, because you seem to be arguing both, really, over the course of.
Why can't it be both? Why can't it be both? He's obviously a very intelligent person. He created a remarkable enterprise. He was certainly a highly talented musician. He was very actively involved in the management of his own music and the management of his own profession. So he's certainly quite capable. But when I say stupid, I mean stupid in the context of somebody who's inclined to go after a child and doing it when they're already under scrutiny. And again, don't misunderstand what I'm saying. Every child molester wrestles with that question. Everyone who molests a child sits back and thinks, there's going to be a horrible consequence if this kid speaks. And so there are a variety of different tools that they implement to be able to keep kids quiet. They threaten them. They tell them that they're going to end up in jail, that the kid will end up in jail. They threaten to harm their parents. There's all kinds of things that they do to try to keep a child quiet. But they always know that there's the possibility this child could speak to somebody who could then speak to the authorities. And all of a sudden, they're in serious trouble. So the act of molesting a child is itself one for which every person who does it is aware that there could be consequences, just like any other crime. But for child molestation, that they know the consequences are life-altering, horribly life-altering.
Yeah. Well, in this case, though, this would have to be, one of the dumbest child molesters that ever walked the face of the earth.
I once heard someone say it: drug addicts, when they're in the throes of their addiction, are psychotic, and he used psychotic in a literal sense. And I think that that's a true statement. You could have a highly intelligent drug addict who is still using drugs, even when it costs them every aspect of their life. Child abuse, sexual abuse, pedophilia, this awareness that the only way that they can satisfy themselves sexually, that the only way that they can have an emotional relationship is with a child. They're simply not capable of doing it with an adult, not a sexual relationship. It is an overwhelming compulsion. It's really no different than the sexuality that all of us deal with. Our desire to be in a relationship, our desire to experience intimacy. With him, it's children. With pedophiles, it's children. And that desire is very compelling. So was he inclined to do it? Let me suggest to you that it might have been easier for Michael Jackson to do it, even with all the scrutiny, because he has the protection of Neverland and all that Neverland was, and all of his guards and all of his support staff, and people who were quite prepared to go to any length to keep him protected because they knew their incomes were dependent upon it as well. So I would suggest to you that, yes, it's a pretty stupid thing to do, but there is no such thing as an act of molestation of any child that isn't also stupid. And in his case, it may have actually been easier to do than the guy who has to do it on a street corner or in the back seat of a car or break into somebody's home to do it.
Well, it didn't turn out that way, but it didn't turn out that way.
Well, that's why you have prosecutors across this country who are prepared to do exactly what we did, and that's go to trial, let a jury decide.
Now, I do want to ask you this question. Why were the other alleged co-conspirators not tried?
Well, I mean, first of all, it is a 6-month trial with one defendant.
Yeah.
If we had put six more defendants in there, each with 1 or 2 lawyers, think about that for a moment, each one asking questions of each witness, that 6-month trial would have been an 18-month trial. And it would have been impossible to find a jury. It would have been impossible to do the case. So the answer is, just as a matter of expedience, it would have been just an ordeal beyond anything that would have been of reasonable capacity for us to do.
So you were willing to let half a dozen criminals go?
Not necessarily. Well, first of all, we let half a dozen criminals go all the time. I mean, we get cases that come into the office where we feel that the evidence isn't sufficient, even though we believe that they are. So that happens on a regular basis, that we make decisions not to prosecute people we think are guilty of crimes. In this particular case, the person who committed the molestation is the primary target of the prosecution, not necessarily people who assisted him on some level. Our expectation was we wanted to see how the trial went, and then we would make a decision as to the other people who are co-conspirators as to whether or not we would file charges against them. Now, once he was acquitted, it became pretty obvious that if he was acquitted of molestation, that the people who helped him were not going to be convicted either. Those were considerably lesser crimes with lesser quantums of evidence. And so we made the decision not to go after anybody else at that point.
But when one actually looks at the transcripts and looks at how the trial unfolded, pretty much every piece of evidence that you introduced, if there was actually a conspiracy, and I'll tell you a little bit later about my own theories about that. If there was a conspiracy, it was these other guys whom the evidence led to, right? Michael Jackson was absent. I mean, like all the things that are happening, all the calls that are happening between these guys.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, exactly.
On whose behalf? Ask that question. On whose behalf? On whose behalf?
I'm saying if it happened, the only evidence is that these guys were involved in it. And you just, I mean, I don't know. 6 criminals are let loose on the public just because they don't have the status of Michael Jackson. This kind of or because it's expedient. I mean, Ron, I mean, if you thought these guys were, conspiring to abduct and kidnap a child, why didn't you throw the kitchen sink at them? Just because 18 months is what it would have taken. I mean, you ought to have gone after them like hell for leather.
The decision was made to pursue a child molest case against the person we believe was the child molester. It would have complicated the case in ways that would have made it untenable to have included 6 more people, somebody who withdrew the children from school, somebody who got a passport, somebody who got a visa, somebody who got plane tickets. We didn't feel that their participation was worth pursuing at that time, given the realities of the trial against Michael Jackson. I understand that you find that offensive on some level. I find it offensive on some level. I don't believe that people who are involved in efforts to contribute to criminal behavior should be let off. But the realities are it was just untenable to do it. So we didn't. And that happens. That happens on a regular basis.
Okay, well, I'm thankful that you gave me a really direct answer to that question, so thank you. So overall, why do you think you lost the case? I mean, you say you don't quibble with juries, but you must, 20 years of looking back, you must have some kind of analysis of where it sort of went wrong.
Child molest cases where you have a victim are very difficult to pursue. And we do it. I mean, we do it all the time. Sometimes we win, sometimes we don't win, because there's a lot on the shoulders of that one child. In this particular case, there were other children. None of them were willing to cooperate on this particular case. If we had had their cooperation at the time, I think that the case could very well have had a different result, because now the jury would have been looking, and I'm thinking specifically of three people: Jordan Chandler, who got over $20 million from Michael Jackson. And I haven't heard you mention that yet, but the question of why would somebody give a 13-year-old boy $20 million to go away? And he then went away.
Would you like? Well, do you want to talk about it? Do you want to talk about Jordan Chandler?
Yeah, we can.
Let's do that. Well,
let me finish this answer, and then we can get to Jordan Chandler.
Please do. Please do.
And then we had the two who have now filed a lawsuit against Michael Jackson's estate, and that's Wade Robson and Jimmy Safechuck. Now, Jordan Chandler and Jimmy Safechuck wouldn't cooperate with us at all. They wouldn't come to court. Yet they have readily acknowledged that they were molested over a long period of time. And then Wade Robson testified on behalf of Michael Jackson. What he now says was a lie. What he says was false testimony, and he readily acknowledges that.
You believe him?
Yes. I believe that was the case before he did that. I believed that he was molested. I believed he was molested based on his proximity to Michael Jackson and based on the amount of time that he spent in his bedroom and his bed. I believed that he was molested. I never bought into the notion that Michael Jackson just likes to hang around children. I always felt that was...
Okay, Ron. So we can talk about Jordan Chandler in a second, and I promise I will. Just on the Wade Robson thing, because it's important, because he did testify in the trial, right? I mean, so that's what marks him out. I do want to say,
but he testified,
and I think it's
Michael Jackson.
That's right. That's exactly right.
Something he now says was false. It was false testimony. He was lying.
And yeah, right, exactly. That's what he says.
Yeah.
My question to you is this: just looking at what this guy is saying now, and actually, no one really knows what happened behind closed doors. But in order to believe that he was lying then, Ron, you have to believe that some pretty competent people are a bunch of morons. Okay. First of all, you have to believe that Michael Jackson's a moron, because he's allegedly molested this kid for 7 years and is still like, okay, I'm going to make him my leading defense witness. But, you've already said that this guy's uninhibited. That's your opinion. I can see why you would make that leap. Fine. You have to believe that Scott Ross, who's been an investigator since 1980-something, is a fool, and that Wade Robson is able to hoodwink him. Hang on. Let me please just, if you'll allow me to finish.
Yeah.
You have to believe that Tom Mesereau and Susan Yu, who are two of the most meticulous lawyers in Los Angeles, are both risk takers and are willing to put on the stand someone who they don't have to put on the stand, even though, so the guy essentially has to hoodwink them. And then this is the crucial bit, right? The next step is he has to get through you, Sneddon, and Auchincloss, and convince a jury. Now, I have read your cross-examination of this guy, okay?
Which one are we talking about? Wade Robson?
Wade Robson. I have read your cross-examination of this guy, okay? I think you lost this case because it was an unwinnable case based on the evidence that you had, right? But no one, I don't know a single person who's ever questioned your competence. Everyone I've ever spoken to has said Ron Zonen is a brilliant lawyer. Tom Mesereau says you're the best he's ever come across, right? We spoke to Aphrodite Jones on this program a few weeks ago. She was like, that was their star. That was the objective person that they had. And he was just, very good at cross-examining witnesses. You're telling me that Wade Robson got past Michael Jackson, got past Mesereau, got past Scott Ross, got past Susan Yu, got past you, Sneddon, Auchincloss, and then got past the jury.
Okay, he didn't get that. All right, let me stop you there, because you made the point, and now let me address it. It has nothing to do with Mesereau being foolish or Scott Ross being foolish or me being foolish. What it has to do with the fact is that there was a unique relationship between Wade Robson and Michael Jackson. Michael Jackson brought Wade Robson to this country when he was, what, 6 or 7 years old.
Right.
Michael Jackson helped him establish a very successful career as a choreographer. Michael Jackson introduced him to the right people, nurtured him in the right way, other than the molestations, in terms of his professional success. He was very much grateful for Michael Jackson's involvement in his life in everything other than the molestations. Now, it's hard to discern one from the other, but he was fully on board with everything Michael Jackson was trying to do until he wasn't. And the point where he wasn't is the point that we have seen many times professionally. It's where an adult victim of sexual abuse has a child. And both of these men experienced exactly that. Robson and Safechuck all of a sudden have a new child, and they're looking in the face of their new child, and they realize that it's actually impossible for them to parent this child properly if they don't address the demons in their own background, if they don't purge that sin that they have inside of them that was visited upon them during the years of molestation. They have to address it. And so they come forward. And they usually come forward in the context of some kind of counseling, a therapy session is usually where that happens. It happened with both of them. I don't remember with whom. They disclosed both of them had children. Both of them came to that realization. Both of them came forward. Up until that point, Wade Robson was squarely on board with Michael Jackson. He wanted Michael Jackson not to be convicted. He wanted that relationship to continue other than the sexual abuse. And I know it doesn't make a lot of sense to you, and it doesn't make a lot of sense to me either, except to the extent that I have seen it repeatedly in the course of my career. It is an unusual, very unique relationship between a molester and the child who's being molested. And it's usually a relationship with a lot of intimacy and even love. And sometimes that's the only adult who's paying any attention to this child. And in this particular case, that may have been true for Wade Robson, who's pulled out of his home that's, 13,000 miles away and brought to Neverland, exposed to Michael Jackson, who lavishes him with attention. He loved Michael Jackson. I'm convinced of that. And he had a great deal of gratitude for him as well. And when it came time for him to come forward and speak on his behalf, he was more than willing to do it. And I think that Michael Jackson was completely confident that he would do what he did. And he did. And Mesereau, who knows what Mesereau knew or didn't know? He had a witness who would be a compelling witness and would do well on the witness stand. And that's what he did. It's not a question of foolishness. It's not a question of them being idiots. They're not. Tom Mesereau is anything but an idiot. He's a highly accomplished attorney. But he had a witness who was going to be a compelling witness, and it wasn't like it was a gamble that suddenly he would get on the witness stand and say something different from what he had said previously. But that happens too. It's happened to me on plenty of occasions in the course of my career.
Well, Debbie Rose certainly did. I mean, yeah. I guess, well, and here's the problem one has, right? I mean, if you're that good, if you've demonstrated the ability to lie convincingly under oath twice, right? A guy like me finds it impossible to say this one was true and this one was not. And in that case,
who lied twice under oath? Who are you referring to now?
So Wade Robson, the best I can do in my position to discount all of it. That's the best I can do. I can just say one cancels the other out. Because to be honest, if you're that good at, sort of convincing people of what you're saying and you're saying oppositional things, the best thing I can do is to just discount all of it. The person I'm interested in is Safechuck, right? Because he did not testify at that trial. And when you watch Leaving Neverland, this is a guy who presents very well, okay? Only problem is he's caught in a demonstrable lie. And that's, and it's such a big one to my mind, that it leaves me now questioning.
You're talking about Safechuck?
Yes, yeah.
And what was his lie? This demonstrable lie? So you've seen Leaving Neverland, right?
So you've seen Leaving Neverland, right? So, Wade Robson, okay, has, okay, the best I can do in my position to discount all of it. That's the best I can do. I can just say this one was true and this one was not. Yeah. Okay. So the entire narrative of leaving Neverland, one deserves to give this a preamble because it's important. The entire argument of leaving Neverland is that Michael Jackson molests these kids. They reach a certain age, and then they essentially age out. They become too old for him, and then he replaces them with another one. That's the entire narrative of the documentary. Sounds like a plausible narrative, doesn't it? Now, in all the court documents that have been generated about the Safechuck case, and it's worth noting that Safechuck and Robson are suing for somewhere in the region of $400 million, which is an obscene amount of money. But let's park that to one side. In all the documents that have been released about Safechuck's allegations, he says that he was molested from between 1988 to 1992. Okay? And then he aged out, and then he was replaced by a younger person. That's basically what it comes down to. Problem is, he says on the documentary that Michael Jackson would have sex with him multiple times in the train station at Neverland Ranch. Okay, he names a lot of different places where they did that. Mike Smallcombe, who is a reporter and editor at the UK's newspaper of record, the Daily Telegraph, says, okay, well, let me just check this claim out. And he gets the planning permits, and it turns out that the train station wasn't built until roughly 2 years later, by which point this boy would be either 16 or 17 years old. Not only would he have perjured himself in the documents, but, ultimately he would have destroyed the entire narrative, because a 17-year-old kid, I was 6 feet tall and could grow a beard, if that's how.
He wasn't molested when he was 17. He wasn't molested when he was 17. We have no indication that Michael Jackson ever had any interest in anybody who was an adult. We have no indication that he ever had sex with an adult, ever. There's certainly not according to the staff, the maids who would clean his room and come in. There was no indication that an adult ever spent a night in his room.
Okay.
I can't speak to the question. Jimmy Safechuck never testified in the trial, so I never heard his testimony. He wouldn't cooperate with us. I don't know what he said to law enforcement. It was Tom Sneddon who was involved with him as a witness, because he was involved in the 1993 case. I wasn't. So I don't know about that circumstance. I don't know when they built the train station. I don't know what existed before the train station. I don't know if he was referring to the particular area that may have existed before they put the train in. I don't know the answer to that question. I know that kids are always getting confused about if something happened here or something happened here or when it happened. That to me has never meant that it didn't happen at all. It means that they're
the director of the documentary, actually goes on to say, it's not in doubt that the train station hadn't been built until 2 years later. Well, what's in doubt is, the date of molestation. So maybe it carried on. And now you're telling me that he didn't molest a 16 or 17-year-old. He doesn't, what he's interested in his kids.
I would be skeptical about an allegation that he had sex with a 17-year-old. Now, maybe if he had a human relationship with somebody, that's possible. But based on everything that we had seen of dealing with Michael Jackson, I didn't think that there was any evidence that he ever had a sexual relationship with someone who was physically an adult, maybe still underage, but physically an adult. I don't think that ever happened. I'd be skeptical.
So now you wanted to talk about Jordan Chandler, and this is, convenient for me because you were actually in the room when all of this was going on, in '93, and you were not in the room.
No, I was not involved in the investigation.
Have you had any interactions with him?
No. I've never met him. I've never talked to him. I've never seen him. I watched his mother when she was on the witness stand, but I've never had a conversation with Jordan Chandler.
Okay. Now, on Jordan Chandler, have you read all the reporting about the Amatol story?
The what?
You must know about this. Have you seen all the reporting about the sodium Amatol story? Do you know about this?
I don't know what that is. I'm telling you, I'm not familiar with Jordan Chandler's allegations, other than to the extent of what's reported in the press. That
Okay,
was
well let's so let's
Yeah.
let's talk about it. Let me just posit it to you, right?
Yeah.
Let me just posit it to you. I can tell you exactly what the allegation is. The allegation, this has been reported by GQ, the Times of London, the Mail, the Sun, the Mirror, and a couple of other publications as well. Here's what the allegation is. So you'll know that Jordan Chandler always refused to say that Michael Jackson had touched him. He said this for quite a long time. And so a reporter is supposed to have asked his father how he actually elicited the confession from him, right? And the father says, we gave him sodium amytal.
Okay, I do remember that.
You know this, right?
Yeah, I do remember that. All right, go ahead.
Now I don't know what this is, right? So I didn't before I was researching this program. I don't know what that is. So first of all, I want to find out whether or not that's true. Like whether or not this has happened. I've been a magazine journalist in the United States.
And his father was a dentist. Is that right?
His father was a dentist. Now I have been so my.
This was something he would administer to his patients to allow him to be able to do dental procedures. Is that what that is? I'm not familiar with what the.
Okay. So it's a strong barbiturate.
Okay.
It's a strong barbiturate that was known as a truth serum. Like people thought it was a truth serum.
Okay.
It has been implicated in false confessions and false memory syndrome, going back at least as far as the Satanic Panic. Okay, and now this sounds so absurd when you even think about it. Like that. It sounds like such a weird story until you go and start speaking to psychiatrists. And so, you don't know about something, you go and speak to people.
We don't have to dwell on this. I get your point. What you're telling me is you believe that his father administered some kind of a narcotic to him, and the consequence was that he then implanted a memory in his mind, and then his son came forward and said that he would molest it. Is that essentially what you're saying happened? I don't know.
I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that is what has been reported. Okay. Right. I don't know.
Let me tell you what I found intriguing about Jordan Chandler's case. I never met Jordan Chandler. He refused to cooperate. He refused to come testify. He was an adult by the time we had our trial, which was in 2005. He was living in New York. He made it very clear that he was not going to be involved in our trial and that he would do whatever he had to do, including leave the country, rather than come and testify in the trial. His mother testified, and she testified that Michael Jackson was there every day for weeks.
For a month, 30 days.
A month, 30 days, okay. That he would be there as soon as Jordan got home, and he wouldn't leave the house until Jordan went to school the next day. And they stayed in the same bed the entire night.
Right.
All right. I don't care whether his father gave him sodium pentothal. His father was an idiot. His father did all kinds of things, including asking for a great deal of money. So there was no question that his father impeded the ability to proceed with that case. But Michael Jackson still felt a need to hand this 13-year-old child $20 million. He made that child one of the wealthiest 13-year-olds in the world, and he did it overnight. And the quid pro quo is that he go away, end the prosecution against him. It was worth $20 million, and it was more than $20 million because money went to the attorneys and money went to the parents. There was a lot of money. It was something closer to $25 million by the time you factor it all in. That is a huge amount of money to give to a 13-year-old child. I refuse to believe that that was just a matter of convenience or it was done by insurance. I don't believe that that's true at all.
I don't know about the insurance story. The insurance story, from what I've investigated,
they would have come up with a canceled check. They would have come up with some proof that that was actually true.
Exactly. I don't believe it.
Alluded to that during the course of the trial, but never.
No, I don't believe that. I don't believe that at all. I do wonder what it would be like. I mean, Ron, when was the last time someone made you strip naked for photographs that you didn't want them to have? It's never happened to me.
And as an adult or as a child?
No, as an
As-
adult, when was the last time someone made you pose for nudes, man? Like, I mean,
no,
it's
nobody,
never happened to me.
nobody's inclined to ask me to pose nude.
Well,
That's
that makes two of us.
stage in my life.
That
Yeah,
makes
yeah,
that makes two of us. But
yeah.
but if that had happened to me, and I was a very, very wealthy guy, I might think about it. I don't know if I would do it, but I might think about it. Anyway, you don't know that much about the Chandler case. You don't know why he didn't testify. He just said he wouldn't. That's basically what you're telling me, right?
I do know why he wouldn't testify. I mean, I can deduce why he wouldn't testify. He didn't want to be he didn't want to be attacked by the Jackson machine, which was formidable, by lawyers standing up and giving press conferences and calling him a grifter and calling him a liar and all manner of attacks and the public turning on him and the Jackson fans hitting him with death threats. I understand perfectly why he didn't want to do it. He still should have done it. He shouldn't have let that child go through that case alone because he understood what was involved more than anybody. He understood what Gavin was going through, and he should have manned up and come forward. But I understand completely why he didn't.
Okay, last couple from me. Ron, before this case came to trial, did you know that Janet Arvizo was a disaster?
Sure, of course.
You knew it?
Of course. Of course. I had many conversations with her. I spent hours talking to her about everything that happened and everything that was going on in her life. And I understood what her deficiencies were. I understood that she was dealing with emotional trauma that was pretty severe in her life and that manifested in very unpleasant ways, that she presented as an extraordinarily needy person, that she was not somebody who was going to appeal well to the jury, that she wasn't controllable, that she would get on the witness stand and she could say all manner of things. You couldn't just ask her a question and expect an answer from her, that she is emotionally deficient on a number of different levels. And it just presents itself in a very unappealing way. No, we knew it was going to be a disaster. But it was also, she wasn't the one who was molested. And it was her child. And we believed, based on everything that we had heard from Gavin, which was quite similar from what we had heard from others, and our understanding of what Neverland was, and our understanding of what Michael Jackson was, we believed Gavin was a victim of sexual abuse under those circumstances. And we were not going to not prosecute that case simply because the mother wasn't as presentable as we wanted her to be.
No, of course you weren't. Of course you weren't, and I don't think anyone is saying that. I almost hesitate to say this because it's, I'm not really medically qualified to give this opinion, but sadly, I have, Ron, met with and spoken to, and actually I'm related to some people who suffer from schizophrenia, right? And reading Janet Arvizo's testimony, it's uncannily similar to the sorts of things I've heard them say.
Yes, you're right. You're not qualified to give a diagnosis.
I'm not.
Nor I. And it would be malpractice to do it on the basis.
But I haven't asked my question yet. Go
ahead.
My question is, when you were about to prosecute this case, had you either asked for medical records or asked her to submit to some kind of psychological evaluation? Because, while I'm not medically qualified, I do sort of know what delusions of persecution are, and I know what that sounds like. And I know when when your kid is having, when your kid is sick with cancer and you don't turn up to the hospital, and when you're on Neverland Ranch and you spend all the time that you have there basically inside in your unit, and when you talk about the killers and being taken away in a hot air balloon, I know what that sounds like. So it's not just me just, sort of riffing off something. This is, we are not medically qualified, but that was my question. Okay.
All right, so
it's
here's the answer to the question.
Yeah.
And there's a story to this too, which you're going to find interesting. And nobody knows about this. And you're going to be hearing it for the first time publicly. On the question, did we ever ask her to be evaluated? We would never do that, ever.
Okay.
Not
Okay.
with the mother of a child who's a victim of sexual abuse. We would never ask anybody to submit to a psychiatric exam. Okay.
Okay.
But I did recommend to her that she go and get some help to be able to help get her through the horrors of this trial and everything that was happening to her family and to her. She was being stalked around the clock. People would be lined up outside her door. They would stand in front of her car when she drove away so that they could get pictures of her. They would pound on the car so that they would get a frightened reaction from her, because that would be a better picture to be able to take and post online. It was a 24-hour-a-day experience for her, and it was horrible. And I felt that we were prepared to help find her a counselor who would be able to help her just navigate through this horrible experience and be able to get through. All right. So that was the closest we would come to in terms of talking about getting a psychological evaluation. We would never say, we want you to be psychiatrically evaluated so we could know whether you're lying or not. If it comes to that stage, then we simply don't use that witness, or we don't file the case in most instances. I wouldn't do that. I found, as to Janet, that she was stunningly reliable in terms of the information she gave us. She was always accurate. She was always accurate on main facts. Now, she would go off on tangents, and she would talk about her ex-husband who was abusive to her, and she would talk about this and she would talk about that. Keeping her focus was always a challenge. But I found that she was accurate. The information that she gave us about what happened and when it happened and where it happened was always pretty accurate. I also, to her credit, early on in this case, she didn't know that her children had been abused. She wasn't the one who came forward with that allegation, which would have been consistent with the defense that she's just trying to set him up for a lawsuit and make a lot of money. She went to a lawyer because she wanted to get all of her stuff back. They took all of her possessions and they put them in storage when they were attempting to move her to Brazil. That's how all of this came to light. She went to a lawyer. His name was Dickerson, as I recall. And she just wanted him to be able to get her stuff back and to get her child off this documentary. That was the one that Martin Bashir did. Yeah, because that documentary was causing her child all kinds of problems in school and with other kids and all the rest of it. So she went to an attorney. She did not know anything about a molestation at all. It was Dickerson who looked at the child and sent them to Larry Feldman, who was the attorney.
Yeah. And that's a coincidence?
I don't know what you mean coincidence. It wasn't a coincidence.
No, what I'm saying is, like there are 59,000 lawyers or something like this.
I spoke with Dickerson. Dickerson told me that he believed that Feldman, first of all, he looked at the child and he believed that there was the potential that the child was sexually abused. That's the right thing to do. As an attorney, that would be the right thing to do, even if the mother is not aware of that. For an attorney,
to refer him to a civil lawyer who sued Michael Jackson for $30 million, that would be the appropriate thing to do.
I think it was
Wouldn't
20
it be okay, 20 million. Wouldn't it be to call the police?
7 million there. No,
whatever it is, it's more money. It's more money than you and I will ever make.
Yeah. But don't put yourself in the shoes of somebody else. Everybody does things differently. He looked at this kid and he thought maybe he needs to have counsel from some other source, and it occurred to him that it was Feldman. Would I have done that? Probably not. All right, maybe somebody else would have done something differently. I'm not going to judge Dickerman for what he did, but he referred the kid to Larry Feldman. Larry Feldman then referred the child to Stan Katz, who was a psychologist, and it was during the interviews with Stan Katz that there was a disclosure of molestation. And at that point, Child Protective Services were contacted. All right, you can be critical of that chain of events as much as you wish, but it happened. That's how it happened. And we can say,
Ron, you're smiling while you say this.
I've dealt with 21 years of explaining these events. I don't justify them. I don't say it was right or it was wrong necessarily. He referred this kid to Larry Feldman because he thought that was the right thing. And from a lawyer's perspective, It would have been a right thing because Larry Feldman would know how to handle that kind of thing if, in fact, he had been molested. And Larry Feldman did know how to handle it. He referred him to a psychologist who then did the evaluation and determined it. I don't find anything wrong with what happened. Would I have done things differently? Possibly. If I was in Dickerman's shoes and they came to me, would I have then called the police? Probably, knowing what I know about the case. I don't care. It's that's spilt milk. That's not worth crying over. Okay. The question is, how did it come about? We were talking about Janet Arvizo. Up until that moment, she did not know her child had been molested.
Well,
And
but
I
that's
you
what I'm saying. It becomes staggeringly difficult to believe that she was not about to make that allegation.
You're basing credibility on your own experiences. You are a highly educated, accomplished man who's fluent in multiple languages. You can't judge everybody by the prism of your own awareness and understanding.
True, that's true.
Experience. She didn't graduate high school. She wasn't formally educated. She had been exposed to horrible abuse for a long period of time. She's emotionally disabled on many levels. To say that you would do something different than her, it goes without saying.
I'm saying that if what you're saying is true, okay, if this is true, and Janet Arvizo never consulted Larry Feldman about filing a sexual molestation suit against Michael Jackson, I mean, which is difficult to believe given what we know, then these guys torched your case.
The case is what it is. We had no say on any of this. All of this happened way before we became involved in it, way before we knew about it. You're wondering why these decisions were made. Ask Dickerman, ask Feldman. I can't answer those questions. It's what happened.
Didn't they enter into a fee sharing arrangement for a subsequent civil trial as well? Like, I mean,
I don't know if they ever signed a retainer agreement with Feldman or not. I don't know if they ever had an agreement or not. That would be the practice if Feldman actually represented them, that there would be a contingency fee agreement that would be done because that's how those lawsuits are handled. That wouldn't surprise me at all. I would assume that would be the case. The Arvizos wouldn't be in a position to be able to pay him his hourly rate, which I would assume would be quite high. So that's not unusual. But my understanding was that Janet Arvizo did not know that her child had been molested. And I had asked her that question on a number of occasions, and she was really not able to answer it. She would say things like, well, I was kind of suspicious that there was something going on, but I wasn't quite certain what. And I wanted to get the kids out of there. And she did. And there's no question she did want to get the kids out of there. And among the people that she called and complained was the woman I'm now married to, was the person who was the mentor for Gavin Arvizo. And so I know that happened. She really wanted to get her kids out of Neverland. But she had never been told that he had been molested. Gavin never disclosed that to her. And that was not part of her thought process. She was worried about what was going on. And you sit back and you say, again, from the vantage point of your Columbia University education, well, that doesn't make sense to me. But you have to look at it from the perspective of an impoverished woman with zero education and a lot of problems in her life. And for her, what she was doing was usually what other people were suggesting that she do. From that standpoint, it would make some sense.
Well, if you substitute, but here's the thing: if you just substituted, the names and you put Michael Jackson in there instead of Janet Arvizo, it would still, that argument could be made as well. That this was a person who wasn't particularly educated. He didn't really understand the world, and he was basically just doing what people advised him to do.
I agree with the premise of the statement. He wasn't well educated. That's true. He wasn't well educated. He was extraordinarily talented, and he ran an empire. So that's where the connection to Janet Arvizo ends. There is no connection.
But you're saying to me, oh, Hasan, you're saying to me, Hasan, you don't understand because, you haven't been in her shoes. frankly, you haven't been in her shoes. You know, like you don't know what it's like to be her.
That's true.
Frankly,
nor have I. Nor have I. And I understand more about it only because I've dealt with so many of these cases. But being a woman, her husband is out of the picture at this point, which was good because he was abusive to her. But she's dealing with 3 kids. She's dealing with crippling poverty. And now she's got this international superstar paying an undue amount of attention to one of her children. That is a very difficult environment to maneuver in for someone who has not only no credibility, but the inability to gain credibility because everybody knows how she behaves and what she's like. So it's hard for anybody to take her seriously.
But you don't give any benefit of the doubt to Michael Jackson because neither of us have been in his shoes either. And this is a guy who's lived a very strange life, you know, like, and, you know, I mean, the strangest that you can possibly imagine. But there's no point. Actually, there's no point dealing with this, to be honest. I mean, you know, like, all I will say is, you're absolutely right. I have not been in Janet Arvizo's position, and I've not been in Michael Jackson's position either. Okay, but yes, but it's not just them. I don't understand any of these people. I don't understand when your child has been allegedly molested and you actually believe that he has. I don't believe why you don't go to the police. You know, I don't understand it. I don't understand going to a civil lawyer and suing for millions of dollars and then, you know, like just taking the money and running and not testifying. I mean, this makes no sense to me, okay? And frankly, I said on a previous show that whichever way you cut it, the Chandler case, you know, either they're extortionists or they took money to endanger the public. And I don't know which is better. I mean, actually, I would have a better view of them if they were extortionists, because
so
then,
no room in your mind for the possibility that the month that Michael Jackson spent in Jordy Chandler's bed was accompanied with acts of molestation too. You just think
but you didn't hear what I said, Ron. I said it's one of two things. Okay, either they were extortionists, or they took money to shut up and let an abuser roam free. That's what I said. You know, like I said, it's a binary choice. That's what I'm saying.
Or both.
Or both. Or both. Well, or both. What I'm saying is
they took money that allowed a child molester to remain free. There's no question in my mind about that. That part.
I question it because of the sodium amytal story. That's why I question.
Was Evan Chandler also a shakedown artist? He might have been. I never met him, and he's dead now, and he can't certainly defend himself. But was he somebody who was looking to shake down Michael Jackson for a lot of money in exchange for not disclosing these allegations to law enforcement? I would view that as reprehensible, extremely reprehensible.
Yeah. Whatever way you cut it, all of this is reprehensible. Yeah. Last one from me, Ron. On April the 22nd of this year, YouGov did a survey of 8,490 adults from the United States. I mentioned the date because it's before the US release of the Michael Jackson biopic, and it's also before the release of the Netflix documentary. The question that was asked was as follows. As far as you know, are any sexual assault allegations against Michael Jackson true? That was the question.
To whom?
What do you think?
To whom was that question posed?
8,490 American adults were asked the question.
Okay.
In an opinion poll by the pollster YouGov.
Okay.
As far as you know, are any sexual assault allegations against Michael Jackson true?
Okay.
That was the question.
Okay.
What do you think the results were?
I don't know. I don't care. Nor do I care. Well, first of all, I assume that you're about to tell me that it was overwhelmingly in favor of the allegations are not true. That you wouldn't be bringing it up if that wasn't the case, or maybe it was unanimously the case. That
no, don't cast aspersions, Ron. You know, like why do you know what? Why do you know? No, don't cast aspersions.
Well, I would assume that would be the case because you wouldn't be bringing it up if it weren't the case.
No, you're casting aspersions here, Ron. What do you know about me? What do you know about me?
tell me what the results of the study were, and then
but I think it's really important here because you just cast an aspersion. You were basically, because I know I've been doing this long enough to understand what people mean when they say things in a particular way, and what you're basically insinuating is that I'm some kind of mega Jackson fan who just can't countenance the idea of his idol being some kind of child molester. That is basically what you seem to be insinuating.
Yeah, I'm not.
Okay, well, I'm glad to hear that. But
you appear to be highly skeptical of the allegations against him. But
it's my job to ask you these questions because you were involved.
And I'm fine with that. I haven't turned off the video yet, have I? Okay.
No, glad to hear it.
I'm answering all of your questions, and I'll sit here as long as you have questions to ask of me.
Okay.
But I do want an opportunity to respond to it. Okay. And you do take a long time asking questions. There's a preamble to each of your questions. They go on for a period of time. All right. Let me see if I can address it. First of all, tell me what the result of the survey was, and then I'll give you an answer as to why I think it might have been.
Okay. Well, I'm sorry that my questioning doesn't meet your high standards. But the results are as follows.
Actually exceeds my high standards. Your questions are very good questions. They're just verbose. But go ahead.
As far as you know, are any sexual assault allegations against Michael Jackson true? And the results are as follows. Yes, 19%. No, 24%.
Everybody else?
Sure. Everyone else says not sure. Okay?
Everybody else says
not sure, don't know. Basically,
sure.
Can't make a determination.
Not sure.
Can't make a determination.
Okay, but I can't make a determination. All right, that wouldn't surprise me. That wouldn't surprise. Does it surprise you?
It doesn't surprise me at all.
It would be interesting if they did the same survey, if they did it now, after leaving Neverland and after the verdict. It would be interesting to see how people who saw either or both of those documentaries, what their
No, they did it. They did it after leaving Neverland. They just didn't do it after. They did it before the biopic, as in before the big Michael Jackson movie, and they did it.
But leaving Neverland. And of those people polled, how many of them saw Leaving Neverland?
Who knows? That they don't ask.
All right, they didn't ask that question then.
They didn't ask that question.
But
what's interesting.
I would think that the answer would be different depending on whether or not they saw Leaving Neverland. I thought Leaving Neverland was very compelling. I thought it was compelling, and I thought it was moving. It was also long. It was 4 hours worth, and so expecting the average person to sit through 4 hours of difficult listening would be asking a lot of people. So I don't know how many people actually watched all of Leaving Neverland, but I thought it was rather compelling. If they picked however many people were there, 7,000, whatever it was, only people who had watched Leaving Neverland and said, what is the answer to that question? Would you expect that there would be different results? I would.
That would be a bullshit poll, wouldn't it? That would be a bullshit poll. It would be like
a bullshit poll. It would be a poll that would be based on their understanding and how they're influenced by this documentary. It would be the equivalent of saying, did the documentary convince you that it happened? And then they'd be answering that question. It would be a different question. I don't know if it's bullshit.
It would be a different question.
It would certainly be a different question. But I think that actually illustrates the issue. They're asked a question of whether or not they believe allegations are true to something for which they have no substantive knowledge.
How do you know they don't have substantive knowledge? That's an assumption.
Because it is an assumption, but my experience of dealing with people is that they actually know very little of the facts. They know kind of headline news. CNN does headline news. They get the headline, but they don't necessarily know. How many people have you come across who have your understanding of this case? Probably very few. Most people don't. Very few. I would suspect 7,000 people who are being interviewed, probably very few of them have your understanding of the case or my understanding of the case, or even the ability to be able to say, okay, I can name one witness who was in that trial. One witness. I can tell you one fact about the case, other than he went to trial, it was a child molest case, he was acquitted, and then 5 years later he was dead. That's what probably the average American can say about the case. So they deal with it. Whenever you ask a poll that is, what do you know? Do you believe something to be true? Is contingent upon how much information they necessarily have. And if they don't have a lot of information, then they're going to give the I don't know, which seemed to be the majority of the people who were asked. And then some people said, yes, I believe he was. And some people said, yeah, I don't believe he was. I guess that poll probably had results that I would have predicted, or pretty close.
Yeah. Yeah. So essentially what it shows is that people who think he was guilty of any one of these allegations are the minority opinion. There are more people who believe he didn't do any of them, and most people don't know what to believe. And by the way,
the only trial he ever had, he was acquitted. All right. So why wouldn't they conclude that I believe it didn't happen? He was acquitted. The jury heard the case and they acquitted him. So if they understand that, if they understand there was a trial and he was acquitted, then it would follow that he wouldn't necessarily be guilty of doing what he was accused of doing. That wouldn't surprise me at all. That would be a perfectly rational response to that survey. Now, I don't know who did the survey. I don't know how professionally it was done. Some surveys are done better than other surveys. I'll give them the benefit of the doubt that was the question that was asked and that people gave a sincere answer. And the result of the survey doesn't surprise me at all.
It doesn't surprise me either. Ron Zonen, I have had a wonderful time talking to you. I hope you understand, what I wanted to do, verbose as I am. No, please do.
Let me add something on all of this. It's now 21 years later. Gavin still gets called a thief whenever Tom Mesereau gets up in front of a camera. He's still referred to as a family of grifters. This family of grifters has never taken a penny related to this story at all. They have never given an interview. They've certainly never sold their story, even though they had an opportunity to do so for probably an extraordinary amount of money. Certainly extraordinary for them because they were impoverished as a family. They didn't have that kind of money. Gavin finished high school, went to community college, graduated community college at the top of his class with honors, was the student body president in his community college, went on to Emory University in Atlanta, which is where he was living at the time. His stepfather was in the military and stationed there. Emory University is one of the top universities in America. Graduated again with honors in a double major, went on to graduate school, has never given a statement about what happened, has never sold a story. He's an honorable man. He married his college girlfriend, who is the daughter of a minister. He's actively involved in his church. He worked his way through college because there was nobody helping him get through school. His family didn't have the money to do so. He did it entirely on his own. He got into college entirely on his own, on scholarship, because of his academic accomplishments. While he was in school, he was working usually 2 jobs. He worked during the day as a landscaper, certainly in the summertime, which in Atlanta is not easy to do. You know what the temperatures are like outside working. At night, he worked as a cook in a restaurant to get himself through college. On his spare time, he tutored children, and he tutored other students in reading, and particularly students who didn't speak English, those who spoke Spanish. He's bilingual and bicultural. He's an extraordinarily honorable man who lives on the East Coast. I'm not going to say where. I'm not going to say what his name is that he uses at this point. He works in business. He's accomplished. He's successful. He lives a very decent, honorable life. He has never stolen anything from anybody. He has no tattoos. He has no piercings. He doesn't drink. He doesn't use drugs. He never has, other than the period of time he was living at Neverland. That was it. He has lived an extraordinarily honorable life. And if you were to meet him and know his story, you would sit back and say, it's a pleasure to have known you. And yet he's still accused of being a crook. And
I'm sincerely glad that he's doing well, Ron. I'm sincerely glad that he's doing well. But I also, as someone who would have acquitted him in that trial, I also have to concede that it killed Michael Jackson to go through that, And it killed him
That's a problem of his own doing. That's a
yeah,
road of creation.
you say that, Ron,
What
but
tell me what you as an intelligent and well-educated man who has awfully spent a lot of time looking into this case, what do you think he was doing in bed with those children?
I don't know. I have no idea.
You seriously don't have any idea?
I don't have any idea what he was doing.
Young boy after another into his bedroom in a room that's accompanied with all of his pornography and booze and drugs.
Yeah, and
what was he doing in bed with these children? You're an intelligent, well-educated journalist, and you're telling me you honestly have no idea, truly?
I have no idea.
Would you let your 13-year-old son go into bed with him?
No, I wouldn't let my 13-year-old son get into bed with anyone. Okay.
Of course.
I wouldn't. But I also wouldn't let my 13-year-old kid go to a ranch and just play around and eat candy all the time.
Of course not.
I wouldn't let my kid, if I go on to have any, stay up at that age beyond, like, say, 9 o'clock. Okay. I am not, but I am not able or willing to look at all of this evidence and say, do you know what? Guy should have gone to jail. He's guilty. I can't do it.
Look,
I can't do it.
But I'm not asking you that question. I'm not asking you the question of whether or not you believe that he molested Gavin Arvizo beyond a reasonable doubt. I'm asking you, based on the quantum of knowledge that you have at this point, based on your education, based on your experience, based on being a practicing journalist, I'm asking you, what do you think he was doing with these boys in his bed over years, one after another? One child after another, there was always a new child coming into his bed. What do you think he was doing? And you say,
I don't know. I don't know.
It's
not a cop-out. It's not a cop-out. It's not a cop-out. It's only a cop-out if you believe that I'm unwilling to answer your question directly, or that I'm unwilling to actually process this and think about it. How is it a cop-out? I have thought about this, Ron. I could not have had this interview with you for the best part of 2 hours if I haven't thought about this at length, okay? And I'm not the only person who feels this way, okay? Everyone in the world knows that Michael Jackson had kids in his bed, okay? Everyone. You prosecuted the case, and it was your job to prove a jury that there was molestation going on. The rest of us don't have that. The rest of us look at this man, and we think, certainly damaged, highly irregular, very inappropriate. But is it criminal? We don't, I don't know, I don't know, man.
All right. Okay. All right. I'm fine with that. I'm fine with that. I have a different level of awareness. And maybe that's based on my own experiences and having been a sex crimes prosecutor for decades. I have my own different level of awareness. I'll accept that. If you say you don't know, I'll accept that.
What does different level of awareness mean? You mean that you just know more about this stuff than I do?
Yeah, than most people, only because it was my profession for so many years.
Okay.
I've talked to a lot of children who were molested. If you say talk to 100 children who were molested, and then talk to Gavin, and then tell me that or watch his interview, and then tell me that there was any significant difference between them. It certainly didn't occur to me that there was any significant difference. I see how children speak who have been sexually abused. I see how they deal with it, how they talk about it, how they're reluctant to tell people, how they're reluctant to tell their parents, particularly their parents, because they know intuitively of the anguish that it's going to cause, and the embarrassment and the humiliation and the difficulty of getting on the witness stand and being pounded with accusatory questions continuously. I've witnessed it. I've seen how it happens. It's not a pleasant thing for children to do. I've seen interviews, many of them. I've talked to easily 100 children who have been molested, maybe more than that. There is a rhythm to it. There is a presentation. There is a physical presentation that you see, and it's consistent with kids in how they present. And if you've talked to enough of them, you see it, you understand it, you know it. I would never sit back and say, yeah, there's a succession of children in his bed amid all of this pornography, and sit back and say, no, I don't know what happened in bed. That would never come out of my mouth. It would never cross my mind. Now, is that because, again, I have accused you of making decisions based on the prism of your own experiences? Maybe I'm doing the same thing. Well, maybe it's not even maybe. I am doing the same thing. I'm doing it based on my experience, and I've had the benefit of being able to speak with many children who have gone through all of this. But I just think it is the height of naivety to be able
You
to
think
say,
it's the height of naivety?
if there
Well,
was if there weren't the drugs and the alcohol and the pornography, then maybe
well,
I'd be a little closer to thinking that maybe he's just a little unique. But with all of that in the room at the time, and with them telling us how they were exposed to all of that, I just have a hard time sitting back and saying, no, I don't know what happened in bed. Not with the
you
kids
know,
saying they were molested. Again, it's not like there's no evidence. You have them coming forward as adults and saying, of course it happened, and it happened over a long period of time. And it's
yeah,
going to be able to say, well, Wade Robson said under oath it didn't happen. Now he says it did happen. So they counter each other out. No, they really don't.
they
Really,
do. Of course they do, Ron.
to you, they do. To me, they don't. He went on national television and for 4 hours he was
Yeah,
interviewed
yeah,
about every single event that happened. He
yeah.
was interviewed about where it happened, about how it happened, about the types of acts. He talked about the fact that there is really no thing that one person could do to another sexually that the two of them didn't experience in their 7 years together. I found that credible. And I'm not inclined to discount it simply because he had lied initially about it, because I understand why people don't tell the truth about having been victims.
His emails were subpoenaed. Okay, his emails were subpoenaed. There was a tabloid article about him. He sent it to his mother and said, "Is any of this true?" The mother said, "Wow, this is all BS. None of this happened."
Who are
He
you talking
included it anyway. You
Who are you
know,
talking about?
Wade Robson, who you were just talking about, he
He said,
included it anyway. He
I'm
included
sorry,
after 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 he came out with his accusations, his mother was going around liking Michael Jackson posts on Facebook.
I
I mean,
mother testified in our trial that he was a
right,
perfect,
right.
and
But I mean,
she now publicly says that was a horrible mistake, and she
yeah,
was not there for her child, and she did not recognize what her child has been exposed to and the danger that he encountered in his life, and she was deficient as a mother, and that is true. She was. She should have had much better insight into what was going on.
I
People
would.
don't understand that when an adult pays an inordinate amount of attention to your child, you need to be careful about that. You need to look carefully at it. Could it be an adult who's really just being a decent person and trying to give a child the benefit of some adult attention? Yes, it could be that. Could it also be that this is a person who's victimizing your child? Yes, it could be that too. And you
It
can't
could be.
as a possibility, which is why you would never allow your child to go to a ranch
No, but
unaccompanied.
I've not. But I've not ruled out. But I've not ruled out the possibility. You asked me a direct question. You said, what do you think was happening? And I said, I don't know. Which
Okay,
is,
I'll
which,
accept your.
which is, which, by the way, is what most people think.
Yeah, most people haven't looked into the case the way you have.
Every single person who responded to this probably knows that Michael Jackson had kids in his bed. It has been tabloid fodder for the best part of 40 years. Everybody knows this, Ron.
They don't have your level of awareness. They don't know if it was somebody who was overnight. They don't know how many children. They don't know how many days. They don't have your level of awareness. But I accept the results of that poll, even though I don't know who did it or how they did it or the quality or the people they asked or what they were familiar with or not familiar with. I'll accept that. I'll accept that. I think the general public, the answer would be, I don't know.
Ultimately, Ron, let me just close it here. Ultimately, the one thing that is abundantly clear to me, on which I have absolutely no doubt, is that art is ultimately uncancelable, right? It's like, in a sense, the guy's dead. You'll never be able to prove anything against him either way. He'll never be around to defend himself. He can't be litigated in a court of law. And his music, if it is timeless, will actually dwarf his personality. No one will, in 100 years from now, that's all that will exist, you know, because art burns up everything that isn't itself, right? That's all that will matter. No one cares what Caravaggio did, even though he's supposed to be a murderer, you know. William Golding was allegedly, you know, attempted to rape someone. People still teach Lord of the Flies in classrooms, right? You know, like, it's like, you know, one of my favorite poets, Philip Larkin, was a raging anti-Semite, you know, like raging anti-Semite. At the end of the day, the person that was Michael Jackson will almost cease to exist in a few more years. You know, all that will be left are the albums and the music videos, and that's it.
I'm
And
hoping that's true. I'm hoping that's true, and I'm hoping that happens in my lifetime.
it
I
may
would,
not happen in your lifetime.
I would love not to have to give this interview continuously for the next 21 years. That
I
would
thought
be.
I thought you enjoyed yourself. You know, I thought you liked talking to me. You know, maybe I was wrong. Maybe I've just been a nuisance.
I enjoy greatly talking to you. I would be happy to put this into the relic of history, my own personal history. I'd be perfectly fine with not ever have to deal with this trial again or any aspect of it.